What is going on, and welcome back to the Film Camera Club. In this video, we're going to be going over ways to get sharper photos with your film cameras, whether it be large format or 35mm film. These are going to be all very cheap and easy ways that you can instantly elevate the sharpness of your photos that you're taking with your 35mm film. Now, one thing that I absolutely love about the SLRs is that there's the limiting factor, and it just is so much more effort and so much more thought goes into how to get the proper exposure and everything to make everything look perfect, because you're only going to get so many chances to do it. And so here's going to be the ways that you can improve the sharpness of your photos. The first off is going to be using a lower ISO. Now, why this works to make your images appear a little bit sharper is that at lower ISOs, the film has smaller grains that are going to look more fine, and so your edges are going to be technically a little bit more detailed. This is why really low ISOs are used for like scanning back in the day. Now, with this being said, lower isn't always better. Underexposed photos are always going to look worse and less sharp than a properly exposed image. So even if you're using 100 and it's underexposed, it's not going to probably look as sharp as something that's at higher, like 800 ISO, and is properly exposed. The next one is really easy. It's just shooting at the highest shutter speed you possibly can. And why this helps is any camera shake is going to make your images look blurry and not as sharp very, very fast. And so by shooting at a higher shutter speed, you're reducing some of that camera shake. As well, having a very good grip on your camera, making sure it's stable, using a tripod if you need to, is always recommended. There's some saying out there that's like the sharpest lens you have is your tripod. And there's definitely some truth behind that. So we're going to count that as 1.5 tips on there. So over the years, the technology that goes into making the glass has greatly improved over time. Now there's lenses out there that cost around $3,000 that have a 1.2 that is sharp edge to edge. It's absolutely insane. As well as them being on a mirrorless camera, which then reduces the distance between the edge of the lens and the actual exposure area. That really helps reduce the chromatic aberration of the lenses for mirrorless, making them incredibly sharp. However, some of these lenses like this one is probably over 50 years old. That's fine. They have some wonderful character to them. So one of the tips that you can do, and this is throughout all lenses that you use, is shooting at a slightly higher aperture. Now this is going to do two things. It's going to reduce the chromatic aberration. There's a lot of science that goes into this. You can look it up and see for yourself exactly how that goes if you so desire. But usually shooting between f4 and f8 on a lens will give you the sharpest throughout the entirety of the image. Now, by no means is this saying don't ever use a low aperture, because sometimes you definitely need to for a given situation. You need the more light and everything, or you just really want something to be blown out, in which case the sharpness of the lens is going to be reduced pretty much across the board for all lenses. But once again, underexposed images are much worse than a low f-stop. If you want to have that wonderful blown out background blur, here's two tips that you can take away to still get that wonderful bokeh that you like, and that is using a zoom lens. When you use a zoom lens, you can still shoot at f8 and still have a lot of background blur because it is a smaller focal length, and then just naturally it blows out the background better. The second tip for getting that background blur is standing closer to the subject and taking it a little bit closer. As the closer you get to your subject, or the closer the subject is to the camera lens, the more blown out the background is going to be. Now be careful not to shoot too close to your lens, because they have a focusing distance that is the minimum required distance for them to focus on a subject. Now our next tip is just using a camera with autofocus. This camera is a manual focus, and sometimes I absolutely struggle to get the proper focus, and I see a lot of missed frames just because they've missed focus, because I'm just not good enough to make this camera work in that way, which is unfortunate at times, but it does happen quite often with this camera. And as I'm getting better and better with it, it happens less and less. But using autofocus really helps nail the focus where you want it. And then also understanding the difference in your SLR. The Focusing that you have through your mirror may be slightly different than the focusing of your actual lens to the film element behind it. And this is one of the things that you can kind of adjust and understand more as you use your camera. In more modern or advanced SLRs and DSLRs, you are able to adjust that focusing distance ever so slightly in one way or the other to compensate for the distance difference in the mirror reflection and then the actual through the lens to the film distance. The next one is a little bit more advanced, and if you're shooting in color or black and white, the concept is really much so the same. You want contrast on the edges. So if your subject is bright, you want whatever that is behind them to be slightly darker, and this is going to give you the illusion of having sharper images. This also works with color contrast. Using primary colors that complement one another really goes a long way to making your images look sharper. Another one is shop around for your scans, because some of the shops will deliver absolutely terrible scans or scan them at home. I know that it might cost a little bit for a scanner or equipment to scan, but it can go a long way to making your images sharper. I recommend the V600 scanner, which can now, there's so many on the market. I picked one up for $120 secondhand, unused and still in the wrapping. So there's definitely really good deals on the scanner out there that you can take advantage of. And the final one is simply sharpening your images in Lightroom. I think you can pull about 10% more sharpness out of an image, and it really helps editing in that process to get sharper images. You can usually pull some extra sharpness out of it without totally distorting the image, which is really nice, but it will not bring back an out of focus or already blurry image. So this has been a bunch of ways to keep your 35mm film and film photography in general super sharp. What did you think? What was your favorite? What are you going to introduce into your next photo shoot? Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.